Welcome to the SwimSwam podcast. As always, I'm your host, Coleman Hodges. I'm joined today by Texas men's assistant coach, Wyatt Collins. Wyatt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Coleman. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. My older brother is also named Wyatt, and so that's the immediate association I have with your name.
Yeah, I've seen his name on SwimSwam through some articles, and I remember seeing him swim as well. And I think he's honestly, not that I've ever met him personally, I think he's the only other Wyatt that I've ever come across in my life. So
Wow.
Special place in my heart, I guess.
Absolutely. I also used to coach like a 6-year-old boy named Wyatt, and so any Wyatt always has a fond place in my heart, and they're always good people. But you both have excellent beards, and that's also a great thing.
Most importantly, right? Was he named after anyone like specifically? Like, did your parents was there another Wyatt in your family, or was he named after Wyatt Earp?
Wyatt Earp.
Hey, there we go.
Absolutely.
That's my namesake as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. My dad was like a huge, he loves cowboys and he loves like Westerns. And so he was straight up Wyatt Earp is his namesake.
I think your dad and my dad would probably get along really well. Very much enjoyed Westerns, like the Wild West and the whole lore of the West. And so named me after Wyatt Earp. And then my little brother, Jack, his middle name is Morgan, which is Wyatt Earp's, one of his brothers is named Morgan. So there you go.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Little Wyatt Earp history lesson.
That's awesome. So let's get a little Wyatt Collins history lesson while we're at it.
All right.
So I know that I read today that you swam at Boston University for 2 years, but tell us a little bit about your swimming background. How'd you get into swimming? How'd you end up collegiately at Boston University?
Yeah. So I started swimming pretty late in life. At least when it comes to most swimmers. I mean, my dad's a swim coach. I'm from New York originally. He's the head coach of Badger Swim Club out of Larchmont, New York.
Okay.
And so I grew up with swimming in my life. My family owns a summer camp, which is down the street from my house. And we have an 8-lane, 50-yard pool that was built in, and actually the only reason I know this is because I was talking to my older brother maybe last week, and the pool was built in like 1920 something. It's like an old school concrete pool, and so it's coming up on its 100th birthday sometime in the next decade. That's where my dad's team would train in the summers. And when I was a little kid and a little rugrat, I would always go over and I would jump on the swimmers' backs as they were swimming outdoors in the middle of sets, and was always kind of around the pool, but never really found my way into it to train seriously, at least until probably, I don't know, my freshman year of high school. And my dad knew Eddie. They had served on some like national team staffs together, and I had kind of grown up hearing some stories about Texas and the Texas men's team and Eddie and Chris. And at some point in my first year or two of swimming in high school, I kind of got it in my head that I wanted to swim at Texas, and that was where I wanted to end up, and that was like kind of my dream scenario. It didn't exactly work out that way, at least not for the short term, because I just wasn't fast enough out of high school to go to Texas. Out of high school, I was probably like 452 in the 500, somewhere around there. I didn't break 5 minutes until my senior year. And yeah, that wasn't quite what Eddie wanted. And
Yeah.
so, I had to kind of rethink my plans and where I wanted to go to school. And I was still pretty new in the sport, and I kind of settled on Boston University. I looked at some schools that were in the Northeast, that lined up with where I was competitively, at that time, and some schools that would challenge me as well, and would challenge me to get better. And so Boston University at that time, still has the same head coach, Bill Smythe, but he had recently taken over at BU. And he was a great swimmer when he was in college, at UVA, and my dad knew him as well. And it just seemed like a pretty good place to end up because it was close enough to home. It was about a 3-hour drive from my hometown. That
Perfect.
it was that perfect in between where um, you're kind of getting away and living on your own a bit. Your parents aren't going to just randomly drop in on you, but it was close enough as well that if I needed to go home for anything, I could pretty quickly hop in a car, hop on a train, and be home within a few hours. But Boston was like, I remember distinctly thinking that, oh man, Boston, like the weather can't be that much worse. It's only 3 hours north. It, was probably super similar to what I was used to. And that first winter, I remember just being like, oh man, what have I gotten myself into? Because the winters were so much worse, so much colder, so much longer. It felt like it lasted like 6 months of the year. And so that was a pretty big change. And fast forward like 2 years, I kind of decided that I wanted to take a year off from BU and go back home and train with my dad's team, and just see kind of what would happen after training for a year. And didn't really have the intention of trying to transfer into Texas or anything like that. I took some classes at Columbia University in New York City because it was close to my house, just to kind of stay with the academic piece, because I felt like if I didn't take classes for a year, it'd be really difficult to get back and like get excited about going to school again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, after like a year of training with my dad, I ended up going like 4:35 in the 500, which still is not anything spectacular. This is back in like 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
Still wasn't spectacular back then. But I remember Eddie reached out to him, and he agreed to give me a spot on the team and give me a walk-on spot. And so I like packed my car up and drove from New York down to Austin. I had only spent like 6 hours total in the city of Austin before I drove down there to school. And that was in the summer of 2011. And keeping with like the weather topic, I drove down there with my mom, my little like VW Golf, and had never driven that long or that far in my life. It was like 25 hours, total.
Oh man.
And got into Austin, and history will show that the summer of 2011 was when we were in this middle of this insane heat wave, where it was like, all told, it ended up being like 90 something consecutive days of 100+ degree temperature. And I came like smack dab in the middle of that. And I mean, it wasn't just like, 100 or 101. Like there were some days in there where it was like 107, 109. And so I remember turning to my mom at one point and just being like, I actually don't know what I just got myself into now. I mean, this is crazy. But yeah, so I drove down in the summer of 2011, and that's how I ended up down in Texas.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was long. That was
No.
just
Yeah, no, So, can you tell us a little about, kind of what you got out of swimming um, at, at, at at Boston, and what, I mean, taking a year off as a college student, that's a big decision. What kind of led you to say, I really want to invest in my swimming more, after 2 years of college swimming?
Yeah, I mean, look, like I knew after my sophomore year at BU, I wasn't making an Olympic team. I wasn't ever going to be someone who was on a national team. I was probably never going to be someone that was going to NCAA's or anything like that. But I do remember really having this epiphany of, man, like I only have 2 more years left of swimming, and even though I wasn't super fast, like I still had pretty high goals for myself. And there were still things that I wanted to achieve. And that's when I decided I wanted to take that gap year, because I was like, you know what? I want to try and give myself the chance to do this, because I know that once I'm done swimming in college, then like that's it. Like there isn't anything after. I'm not going to keep swimming for Olympic trials or anything like that. So I kind of wanted to just take the opportunity to see what I could do. Um, and yeah, I mean, Boston was great for me, because it was, I mean, one, I was coached by my dad, for my entire career, which is it's an interesting experience to say the least, for
Sure.
anyone who has ever been coached by a parent or a parent who coaches their kid. It's really difficult. Um, so it was, on one hand, it was great because it was like a very timely transition to go off to college and have a different coach who isn't related to me, and maybe we don't always see eye to eye, and to push me and challenge me in certain ways. And it was just a great experience because I had a lot of really close friends on the team, that I'm still friends with to this day. And it was it was a good stopover, in terms of my career. It was great for where I was at that point. But after taking that gap year, and having the opportunity to kind of complete my dream that I had, as a freshman in high school or sophomore in high school when I was first starting out, to be able to go to Texas,
Hmm.
I just felt like that was something that I really couldn't pass up. And I didn't want to look back on my swimming career or my life at some point and say like, man, I really wish I had taken that opportunity and taken that road and like gone down it to see where it would lead. And I had a kind of inkling at that point that I might want to coach. And so that was another part of it where, I felt like the opportunity to swim for Eddie and Chris, and to be able to have that experience if I was going to start being a coach, or I wanted to explore that option at some point in my life,
Hmm.
um, that just learning from those two guys would be incredible. And that would be pretty much invaluable if I wanted to pursue a career in swimming and coaching, I should say.
Yeah. So, so when you reached out to Eddie and asked for a spot on the team, did you have a backup plan if he had said no?
Um, I think the backup plan at that point was, either try to go back to BU, or that I think that was the backup plan. I mean,
Yeah.
there was no really other well thought out backup plan. And there certainly wasn't something where it was like, oh yeah, all right, if this doesn't work out, then I'm going to try this. If this doesn't work out, I'm going to try that. If that doesn't work out, then I'm going to try that.
Hmm.
It was a pretty spur of the moment thing, like even reaching out to him when I did. And I honestly hadn't expected a whole lot out of it. Um, but it's one of those things where I guess the lesson in it is, if you got like a dream, or you're really committed to something, or you want to try and see something through, you want to try and make sure you don't leave any stone left unturned. And so that was a good lesson in that for that part of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get to Austin, you're sweating your butt off, uh, and you get to swim for Texas. So tell me about your first practice with the team.
So I think the first practice, I think I was in the lane with Brendan Hansen and Kathleen Hersey.
Oh, wow.
Kathleen was training with the men at that point,
Okay.
and it was I mean, you've been to our pool, so you can visualize it. It's like, our side of the pool. There's the very end lane. I was in that lane with them too, because back then that's kind of where the distance people congregated. That's where the distance swimmers swam. I'm not
Mhm.
sure why Brendan was over there. I mean, Kathleen, two flyer. I could see why she might dabble over there a little bit, but
Yeah.
I distinctly remember the very end of practice. We did 100 IM for time, and they both were like, "Yeah, no, you're going first." And I was looking at them like, "Are you sure? Like, I'm just happy to be here right now, be surviving this practice, and not be
Uh-huh.
like at the bottom of the pool. You guys are way better stroke specialists than I am." And Brendan was just like, "No, man, you're going first. Like, you're leaving in 12 seconds. You better get this." And I was like, "Oh, wow." So that was a crash course.
Mhm.
And that was like, I mean, it's pretty surreal to think about, but
Did you
I
make
remember,
it? Did they like catch you? Did they touch your
oh
feet?
yeah. I mean, they went 10 seconds back, but they beat me without a doubt. I mean, I think it was one of those things that, because I was first, um, they didn't pass me or catch up to me,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I knew what they went and I knew what I went, and they definitely beat me. They didn't necessarily know what I went, but
Okay.
yes, Brendan, Kathleen, if you guys listen to this, you beat me in that 100 IM that first practice. That was
Well, that's that's a great first day. Um, I mean,
it.
so after that, walk me through that season with Texas and kind of your experience, what you gained from it, maybe what surprised you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that first season, well, that was 2011. That was, yeah, 2011, 2012 NCAA year, and that was like, I remember going into that locker room, almost like a fanboy, right? I mean, like, I was geeking out because of the people that were on the team at that point. It was Austin Surhoff, it was Eric Friedland, it was Dax Hill, it was Jimmy Fegan, Neil Caskey, Jackson Wilcox, Michael McBroom,
Yeah.
Nick Vincenzo. I mean, these were people that, like, as a mediocre level swimmer up in the Northeast, like, I saw them and would see their times, and, like, back when that was, I mean, that was before SwimSwam, but that was when flow swimming was still like a um, big swimming media network, I guess. And, like, Garrett McCaffrey would go and do all those workout. Like, I remember was it the weekly Wednesday workout or workout Wednesday or whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, like, those were the guys that you would watch, right? And they'd be throwing down these insane times and these insane sets. Um, and so it was a really surreal experience. And I think there was a lot of times where I kind of had to pinch myself, the fact that I was even on a team with them, right? And swimming in the same pool and swimming in the same lanes. Um, and it was wonderful. It was an incredible experience, but I also think that in some ways, like, I was in over my head because of that. I mean, I think in some ways I was almost, I felt like I didn't belong completely, which was not through anything that the team did. It was all through my own thoughts, right? And my own headspace and mental space of, like, oh man, I don't believe, or I don't belong here. Like, I remember thinking, I think it was the first week of morning practices, and I remember walking to morning practice with Cole Cragen and Matt Belikonich one morning, walking from, like, the dorms to the pool, and I was freaking out because I was like, I think Ed's just gonna kick me off the team, because, like, I'm just not good enough, right? Like, I shouldn't be here. Like, I shouldn't be here with you guys and, like, training with you guys. And I remember both them, like, just stopping and being like, hey man, like you're on the team now, like you're part of us, you're part of the group, you're a Texas Longhorn, and don't worry about any of that stuff. Like as long as you're working hard and busting your ass, then you're gonna be fine, you know? And that was like a kind of a pivotal moment, you know, of just saying like, okay, I need to let a lot of that go, and just enjoy the time that I have here, you know, because I knew at that point as well that I was only going to have 2 years, you know, and so I still wanted to make the best out of it and see what I could do in my swimming career.
Yeah. So how do you end your first season as a Longhorn?
So I swam an American short course. So I didn't make the Big 12 team, and I actually probably 2 weeks before American short course, I got strep throat like so badly. It was crazy. I remember waking up one day and we were tapering, like getting ready for like kind of the championship season, and I remember my throat being kind of sore. I figured, oh, it's just allergies. I mean, you know, living in Austin, I mean, allergies are so bad, like all the time. And from New
Yes.
York, I'd never experienced before. And so I was like, oh, it's probably nothing. Like took an Allegra or Claritin or whatever and just went on with my day. And then the next day, I remember waking up and like being a little maybe feverish and like sweaty. And it was a little bit worse, but thinking like, it's probably just like really, really bad cedar. You know, I mean, that's the thing that everyone, oh, cedar allergies down.
Right. Yeah. The cedar.
Yeah. It's like the catch-all, right? I mean, like, oh,
Yeah.
you had problems here. And then like the third day, like I couldn't even swallow. And like I remember going to the doctor and they were like, yeah, this is really bad. Like they took me to the hospital. Like I had to get a shot of penicillin. And I did not have a good American short course. Just didn't was not a very good meet for me. Didn't go any best times. But you know, it was a really good experience just being on the team, and my workout, like my level of my workouts had gone up so much, and it was something where I was obviously disappointed that I didn't get to kind of see the fruits of the labor, so to speak, of the entire season. But yeah, it was a good experience all in all, even though I didn't get the end result that I wanted.
Yeah. So did you swim a second year?
So yeah, this might be a long podcast, but
Yeah, we've got time.
so yeah, I did. I swam my senior year. I swam probably through October or early November, and then I quit. So it was like a very abrupt end to my swimming career. Like I remember calling my dad one day. I was in distance group at Texas, and so we do 2.5 hour practices on Tuesday, Thursday afternoons. It was before one of those practices, and I just remember like walking in and like calling my dad and just saying, I think I'm gonna quit. And he was like, well, you know, give it some time, you know, just get through this practice, and you know, we can talk about it and figure it out going forward. And it had been something that was on my mind for, you know, probably a few weeks, honestly, at that point. And I walked out on deck, like not in my suit, and the guys were already in the water. Like the rest of the distance group was already in the pool, and Eddie was just sitting in the bleachers. And I sat down next to him, and I was like, hey, Ed, like we need to talk. And he was like, yeah, sure, of course. What's going on? And I just said, you know, I don't think my heart's in this anymore. And I think it's time for me to hang up the suit, hang up the goggles. And he was like, well, why don't, because, you know, we were pretty much coming to the end of our like really hard training, right, of the fall. And we had maybe like another 2 weeks before we were going to start tapering for our Texas invite, which was always the week after Thanksgiving. And, you know, he was like, well, why don't we just take you out of distance group? We'll put you in mid D, you know, we'll taper you a little bit longer, you know, we'll shave you completely for the invite, and we'll see what happens, you know. And, maybe if you go some best times, like it'll kind of reignite that fire for you. And that way we can, finish off the season. And I told him truthfully that I appreciated that. But for me, like this has been something that I've been mulling over for a few weeks now. And I just think it's time for me to walk away. And I remember him saying, well, if it's been on your mind for this long, then it probably means it's the right decision. And I told him, look, like I want to I would love to come talk to the guys tomorrow at beginning of practice and just tell them that I was going to be leaving. And he was like, well, why don't we just do it now? And I was like, okay. So he pulled the distance guys out of the pool, and the rest of the team had started pretty much walking in at that point. So we went in the locker room, and they kind of just gave me the floor. And I remember I just like broke down crying, I mean, it was just all these emotions and like everything was just hitting me. And, I kind of like barely got it out that, my heart wasn't necessarily in this, and like it wasn't fair for me or fair for Eddie and Chris to take time away from them, and it wasn't fair for my teammates and everything. And I remember Kubik stood up and he was like, well, there's one last thing to do for you, Wyatt. And he just put his horns up, and everyone stood up and all started singing the Eyes of Texas. And at that point I was just like, waterworks, like, oh my goodness, this is, I still get like emotional about it at this point, thinking about it. And then Eddie pulled me aside after the meeting and was like, look, do you still think that you want to coach? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I do, but I'm just not sure what to do about it at this point. And he was like, well, I want you to still come to practice like 3 or 4 times a week, whenever you can make it, as long as it's, not too difficult for you to do, and be on deck and just, see things from the other side. Right. And he was like, that way it'll kind of give you an idea of what coaching is like. And, it'll give you an idea of if it's something that you would want to do going forward, and if it's a career you want to pursue. And so I think like I took pretty much a day off, and then I was back the following day at practice. And for the rest of the year, I was pretty much there. I couldn't coach, I didn't do anything, but I would just come and observe and, either pick Eddie's brain or pick Chris's brain. And Chris kind of took me under his wing a lot that second half of my senior year. And that's how it kind of got in my head that maybe I wanted to do some college coaching. And that kind of, that seed that had been planted, like kind of started germinating at that point, of getting into a coaching career. And seeing how Eddie and Chris interacted with the athletes in the summers from the other side of things was really great to see. And it was really good to see just how things worked from the other side. And yeah, so then that would have been 2013. Yeah, 2013, I graduated from the University of Texas. And then I actually I coached club for that summer before I started coaching as a volunteer assistant. But yeah.
So, in your second semester senior year, when you were just on deck talking to Eddie and Chris, do you remember, specific conversations you had with them, or, what you were asking them about, what little nuggets they gave you during that time?
So honestly, like those kind of conversations didn't really happen until I was like a volunteer assistant. Really that second semester of my senior year, I was like mostly a fly on the wall. It was a very I don't know. It was an interesting experience just because, obviously because of NCAA rules, like you can't be coaching. There's not a whole lot for me to do. We had a team manager, so it's not like I could be a team manager. We have a director of ops who is like the best director of ops literally in the world. And so
he is at every swim meet.
It's crazy, right? I mean, he, total aside, but every once in a while I'll think I get like a leg up on John and think that thinking a couple steps ahead, and I'll like call him and be like, hey, John, great idea I just had. Let me run it by you, and I'll throw out whatever idea that I have or whatever thought I have, and he'll be like, oh yeah, I already got that done last week. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll let you do your thing, man.
Great.
Yeah, that second semester senior year was really kind of just being a fly on the wall, seeing how Eddie and Chris interacted with everyone, how they interacted with each other. I would, truth be told, like I was honestly still kind of shy to maybe a little bit too shy to ask Eddie and Chris like straight up training questions and straight up about, hey, why do we do this? Why do you think this is the right way to do this? Why are we doing this set instead of that set? And I figured that for me, at that point in my life, I was like, this is going to be, now that I'm saying this out loud, it starts to like come up as maybe a theme in my life, but like, this is the last time that I'm ever going to be on deck at Texas. And this is the last time that I'm going to be able to spend time with them. And so like, I just want to enjoy it for what it is. And I'm just going to try to absorb everything. Right. I would kind of I kept like a training log when I was swimming, and I would, kept a log of practices we would do and practices the guys would do when I was observing that second half of my senior year, just because I was like, I need to get it while I can, because it's going to be gone soon.
Yeah. So then you coach club in the summer, and then you come back as the volunteer.
Yeah. So that was an interesting like hiatus. I really, leaving Texas the spring of 2013 when I graduated, I really figured like that was going to be it. I had played with the idea of moving back home and coaching with my dad, and helping coach my dad's club team, Badger. But I like so many other people, like come to Austin and are like, I do not want to leave. How can I stay here? I'm not ready to go yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured that, Badger for me, as a coach, it's kind of a safety net, right? I mean, like it's something where I can always go back to at some point. And so I wanted to kind of do things on my own and kind of forge my own way to a degree. And so I figured I would try club down in here, and got a job at Nitro, and was coaching Nitro for like, I don't know, maybe probably started in May of 2013 and went until like September. And just because of some scheduling stuff, like I wasn't working mornings anymore at Nitro. And so I had reached out to Chris, just, another kind of shot in the dark, and just said, hey, I know, because the way we do morning practices at Texas is it's like Eddie and Chris would be there on Monday morning, and then only one would be on deck. Like Chris would do Tuesday, Thursday morning, Eddie would do Wednesday, Friday. So you're only having one coach on deck. And, we have a pretty large team. And so I reached out to him, which is like, hey, I don't know if this is of interest to you, but I have mornings free, and I don't know if it would be worthwhile to have an extra person on deck, just to help with numbers and have another person, another set of eyes. And he was like, yeah, that sounds great. And so I went out there for like really only expecting to be going maybe once or twice a week. And maybe after like 2 weeks, I had gone to every morning practice, and Eddie and Chris pulled me aside and were like, hey, we know that this isn't, it's not going to help pay your bills or anything like that, but would you be interested in being a volunteer coach? And at that point, I honestly really hadn't even explored that. I didn't even know what a volunteer coach was or what the role exactly entailed. Mm-hmm. And they were like, yeah, well, we can give you free t-shirts, like you get here. And I think like pretty much before that conversation was over, I made the decision that I was going to leave Nitro, and I was going to go back to Texas and start coaching as a volunteer. full time, even though you're not like I'm making full time money or anything.
So this is an interesting thing, right? Because I've met lots of college volunteers, and
Yep.
it's so interesting to me because I think it's kind of like a rite of like if you want to get into college coaching, at least at like kind of like a Power 5 D1 level,
Right.
you have to volunteer for a year.
Yep.
And they don't get paid. And I'm like, how do you live?
Yeah.
So you were volunteering and you quit your job at Nitro. How did you live and pay your bills?
Yeah. So, I kind of made the decision that if I was going to be a volunteer assistant at Texas, and, this is like the illusion I made maybe 10 minutes ago that now that I talk about it, it keeps popping up. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to be at Texas for 1 year as a volunteer assistant, and I don't know what's going to happen after that. And I might not have this opportunity ever again. So I want to make the most of it. And so I wanted to pretty much just dive into it head first and act as if I'm, an Eddie or a Chris, and I'm going to be at every single workout that I can be. And I didn't want to be coaching club on the side because that would take away from my ability to be at at the college practices. And so I actually it was super fortuitous. I was just starting my volunteer coaching career right as Favor was becoming a big thing in Austin. And so I remember seeing an ad for Favor, and they advertised like great pay, like flexible hours, you get to make your schedule. And I was like, that is me, that is what I need right now. Let me explore this and figure out what this is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, for anyone who's not familiar with Favor, it's pretty much like an app that their whole premise, and I don't know what they do now, if they still do it to the same degree, but they just delivered anything but alcohol, right? So it was like you could go on the app and you could have someone pick up McDonald's for you, or pick up groceries, right? You could do like a grocery list, or if you're sick, and you want someone to go to CVS and pick up Pedialyte for you, and whatever over the counter stuff, you could do that. And so the first, I don't know, I guess the first year or so I was volunteer assisting when I was working for Favor, it was the perfect storm almost, where they were still small enough that their delivery area was it was between like 35 and Mopac on the east and west, like the river, or it just went barely south of the river. And then the northern border was like 183. So it was like a very small delivery zone.
Yeah.
And because they were trying to get more drivers, they would do these guaranteed hourly minimums. So you could sign up and pick certain hours, like dinner rush, or sometimes like a brunch rush on weekends, and you'd be guaranteed to make $20 an hour. Yeah. And so I would just rack up those and would just be driving around, Austin at weird hours whenever they would have these $20 guaranteed hours. And that's pretty much how I paid for most of my, I guess, most of my bills and my rent and all that stuff when I was working as a volunteer assistant for the first probably like 18 months or so. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you volunteer, you start volunteering with the Texas team. The Texas tradition, the Texas team is one that is steeped in tradition, right? I mean, Eddie's been there for 40 plus years now. I mean, we all know how storied of a program Texas is. What did you start learning about, those traditions, the way they do things? Tell us a little bit about just how you became enmeshed in the Texas tradition.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I knew that I was someplace different than I had been before when like kind of that story that I alluded to or told you a little bit about with Matt Belikonich and Cole Cragen walking to morning practice, and me like freaking out that I'm not fast enough to be here. I don't belong here. I'm going to get kicked off. And, them kind of talking me off a ledge. And, they had known me for like 2 weeks at that point, 3 weeks. And I was like by far the slowest kid on the team. And, in my mind, that was like, and I think in a lot of swimmers' minds, they equate their self-worth to their speed, right, and their times, and which is, a kind of an unfortunate side effect of the sport in some ways. But that was my kind of the first inkling that I had that this was a really tight-knit group of guys and a very close brotherhood where, kind of once you were there, you were in something special. And, that was something that really stood out from just my interactions the first few months I was on the team, and it just kind of built on each other month after month. And stories from Chris and Eddie about, guys that swam in the late 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and being able to kind of trace, like you said, the tradition back from 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, all the way to kind of the genesis in 1978 when Eddie and Chris got there from Auburn. And the kind of the brotherhood of the team culture is certainly the biggest thing that stands out, talking about like the Texas tradition and just how the team cares for each other and supports one another. I mean, the amount of team meetings that we would have in our locker room, which I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's tiny. Like it's a really, really small locker room. So you shove like 40 guys in there. Most of whom are like 6'5" or whatever, and,
Right.
and then coaches. And I mean, just some of the team meetings that we would have were tearjerkers. I mean, there were guys talking about family members passing away or coming down with cancer, or Eddie telling stories about kind of seminal moments in Texas swimming history, and guys going through really difficult and really dark times. And the fact that, as like a 21-year-old guy at that point, those were feelings that I never wanted to express those to people. I never thought about talking to anyone about those, let alone, my teammates or my coaches or anything like that. And so I think in a lot of ways, having those experiences, it brought everyone not necessarily together, but it allowed people to drop their guard, allowed people to drop their walls and their defenses, and it gave people permission to talk about hard things, right? And as a result of that, it allowed everyone to get really close, because you just sat through a meeting where someone was telling you and 35 other guys about how their father just got diagnosed with like stage 3 cancer, and there was a good chance that he wasn't going to make it for 6 months. And that is a way of bringing people together. And it, like I said, just gives you the permission to talk about those things and to bond in a way that I had never seen before, up to that point in my life. And even going off of some of the traditions that just come to mind, one of the longest running traditions that we probably do is like every Friday after our afternoon workout, the guys have a team meeting, and it's just the team, no coaches. They all go in there and they go around the room and they clap up different things that they did that week that were noteworthy, right? And it could have been in the water, it could have been in the weight room, it could have been in the classroom. And they spend some time in there doing that, and then they vote on where they're going to go to dinner, and they all go to dinner as a team together. And that's like, I've had multiple conversations with Cubic trying to trace down when exactly that started, but the best guesstimate is like sometime in like, I think the mid 80s is when that started, and it's been happening, pretty much every Friday since then. And I think that's one of the really unique things about having Eddie, right? Because he's this direct link that goes across so many generations of Texas swimmers, so that any kind of team tradition that starts, it continues, right? And so I think that's a really cool thing about being part of the Texas swimming and diving team is having a lot of those traditions that you can kind of lock onto.
Absolutely. So you volunteer, and then 3 years in, Chris retires, and at that point, you guys were the back-to-back national champions. I'm pretty sure you had won two in a row.
So yeah, 15 and 16,
Okay.
right?
Uh,
Yeah.
and so uh, I so why do you think you got the job as assistant coach? Like from your perspective.
Ask Eddie. I don't know. um, I, so look, it was I think every year that I was at Texas as a volunteer assistant, I figured it was going to be my last year. Um, just because I figured that Eddie and Chris would get to a point where they were just like, dude, why are you still here? Right? Like, go do something else. Like, go get out of here. We're ready to be done with you. But like I don't know, to my shock, like they never did. Right? And every year they welcomed me back, and things were wonderful. And the Chris's retirement was honestly one of the most shocking moments of my life. I had summer 2016 Olympic trials. I knew Olympic trials were going to be my last coaching experience with Texas, because it was like the natural ending off point. I had talked with Eddie and talked with Chris about it. My lease was up in August, and so I was gonna pack my car up and drive back up to New York, and was gonna coach with my dad, because I'd always wanted to coach with my dad before he retired, and so figured it'd be a good time to do that. And like I distinctly remember, probably it might have been I can't remember if it was a few weeks or a few months before trials. But I remember Eddie and Chris sitting me down on the bleachers after practice one day, and they said, because I had been vocal to them about my plans to go back to New York and to coach club, and they both said, look, we really think you should reconsider the club versus college coaching route. We think that you should try coaching college, and we think that you'd be good at it, and just tell us, what job do you want, and we will try our best to help you get that job, right? And like I think at that point Stanford was open, and USC might have had an opening, like an assistant coach opening, and there was a couple other like legitimately big name college teams that were open, and they were like, look, like we'll make some calls, and we'll see, if you want to get your resume ready, we can kind of put you in touch with some coaches and some ADs. And, I thanked them for that. Like it meant a lot to me that they were going to support me, and they wanted to help me. But I looked at them and I said, I don't feel right going to some other school and coaching other athletes at a different institution and taking their money, because I know that in my heart, like if I had gone to some other program, that if we fast forwarded to 2017 NCs, like I was going to be rooting for Texas, right? Like, and that didn't sit well with me, and that like gave me a really icky feeling. Like I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to try and recruit kids, to come to some other school, when in my heart of hearts, like I'm like, yeah, but Texas is really the best, or like that's where I really, really want you to go, or that's where you should really look. And so, I just told them like, look, I appreciate it, but I'm not ready to coach anywhere else, and I really might reconsider that at some point. Maybe after a couple years of coaching club, I would get the itch to go to college, and there'd be enough of a gap between me being at Texas and me coming back to college coaching that I could then maybe look at it as more of a job and say, yeah, it's just business. But at that point, like I wasn't ready to do it, and I remember they kind of looked at me and they hemmed and hawed a little bit and were like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, like I'm just gonna go back and coach club at Badger. And they're like, all right, and that was kind of that. Um, and then going into Olympic trials, Cubic came up to me maybe like the week we were leaving, and he gave me a signed envelope, right? And or it was a sealed envelope, I should say. And he asked me to write my name over the back of it, right? The back flap. And he was
Okay.
like, look, these are my predictions for how we're going to do it at trials, right? Like every single person, times they're going to go, places. I want you to sign over it so that that I didn't go change things. And after trials are over, we can open it up and see how close I got to it. And I was like, yeah, that's a great game. Like I love that.
Yeah.
Do it. I'm excited to see how close you were. And like I had said earlier, Chris was like my mentor, right? Chris took me under his wing, and I can't say enough accolades about Cubic. And so for him to like be excited about that, I was excited about it. And I was like, Chris is probably gonna guess like 80% of the right times,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like how I held him on a pedestal. And went to trials, had a great experience, Olympic trials, first time being on deck there. And a couple of our guys made the Olympic team, which was great. And fast forward to a couple weeks later, we're in the TSC, and our Olympians, so it was Townley and Jack and Clark, were down at training camp, which was in San Antonio that summer. And we had a smaller group because we still had a bunch of guys that were training for US Open that was later in the summer. And we're sitting around beginning of practice one day, and Cubic was like, hey, we need to have a quick team meeting just on deck. And we sat down, and I had totally forgot about the envelope at this point. He kind of pulls it out, and he was like, Wyatt, do you remember what this is? And I was like, oh, yes, this is awesome. This is great. Like, let's see. And he opens it up, and he takes out a piece of paper, and I can see as he's taking the piece of paper out that it's like a letter, right? It's a typed letter. And in my mind, I'm thinking, it's a really weird way to make predictions.
Yeah.
That seems really inefficient. I would have just, and I remember I was sitting next to Will Lacone, right? And Will's asking me like, what is that? And I was like, meat predictions? I don't know. And he starts reading it, and it becomes pretty apparent that as he's reading it, like it's his resignation letter, and I remember like the guys were freaking out. I was freaking out. Eddie was crying. Like Lacone started crying. I start crying, and Cubic, like it was this beautifully written resignation letter. And, he was planning on staying through the summer. And Eddie talked to everyone for a little while, and they were like, all right, we're getting in the pool. And everyone was like, what do you mean we're getting in the pool? And Cubic was like, oh yeah, I mean, you guys all saw that coming, right? And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like our world has just been shattered, because like it's essentially the pillars of Texas swimming are Cubic and Eddie, right?
Yeah.
And Carol was over there, and like I remember I'm like hugging Carol, and I'm crying, and she's crying. It was a mess, right?
Sure.
And it was an emotional roller coaster. And I still at that point was like committed to going home, going back to New York. And maybe 5 minutes after, Eddie just, in total Eddie fashion, like he just walks by me and he's like, so do you want the job? And I was just like, wait, what? And he was like, well, if you want it, I'd love for you to be here. And I was just like completely in disbelief. And Cubic like pulled me aside and was like, hey, let's talk. And so like he pulled me into the office and sat me down, and like we kind of had a much lengthier talk about like what everything would entail. And he talked me through a lot of things. And I remember walking off of the deck that day and calling my mom and being like, I think I'm going to stay at Texas. And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, Chris retired. And she was like, oh my God, no, that's terrible. Like what's going to happen? Is Eddie going to retire? Is what's going on? And I was like, Chris retired, Eddie's sticking around, and he asked me to take over for Chris. And I remember like it was a pin drop, moment. Same thing with my dad. And so that was really like the course of 15 minutes, my entire world shifted, my entire life. Like I knew I wanted to coach, obviously, but it took on a whole different direction, and went in a direction that I had never, ever imagined in a million years. And I'm still like stupidly grateful for Eddie and for Chris for even being here. And there are times when I still have to pinch myself because, I still feel like in some points I'm still like that 21-year-old kid who's like walking on the team who's like, wait, is this like a dream or is this actually happening?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how that happened in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's very obvious from, the answer that you gave to Eddie and Chris about why you wouldn't coach at another college, how enmeshed you are in the Texas tradition. And it's like if they're going to pick a wingman, that seems like an easy choice. So I guess to kind of come to where we are today, this was your third season, as in a fourth.
This was finished my fourth. Yeah.
Okay.
So
fourth season in this role. How do you feel you have carried on some of those Texas traditions? How do you feel you've grown them? Have you instilled your own traditions in these guys? That's 4 years. That's a full college class.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really good question. And so a lot of the traditions that I still carry on come to me from Cubic. Cubic, I think in a lot of ways was the cultural backbone of the team, and he would have a lot of really, really emotional, really deep meetings with guys and with classes, talking about things that had happened in the past to people on the team, and would weave it into how, why we do things a certain way at this point in our history as a swimming and diving team. And so I still do those, I still include those as like some meetings I have with every freshman class to talk about some things. And they're topics that Cubic, he always took on. And so for me, moving into that role, I wanted to obviously keep those traditions alive and also do it because it was important to Cubic. And if it's important to Cubic, it's important to me, and I think the first year or two I was on staff as Cubic, it was interesting because there definitely were points in time where things would happen and I would find myself thinking, what would Chris do in this situation? And there were times when I would call him up and, he's always been in my corner and he's always picked up my phone calls and he's always given me the best advice that I could ever ask for. But, there was a certain point along the way where, like you alluded to a little bit, I've been here for 4 years and there was a certain point where, I started putting my own spin on things. Right. And I realized that like, it's okay to think of this as, this is my team to a degree, and it's obviously Eddie's team at the end of the day, but I am a coach here and I can maybe do things a little bit differently sometimes. And it doesn't always have to be this like really regimented schedule of how things are going to go. And that was something that I struggled with a little bit. But I think in year 3, that was when I got a little bit more comfortable being in the role, and I got a little bit more comfortable having my own identity, right? And allowing that to seep into the team a little bit and allowing that to seep into the guys a little bit as well, with, how we either communicated or how they carried themselves, how the team carried itself. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been a journey, just in the last 4 years.
Uh, I remember at the Minnesota Invite this past December, I
Yeah.
talked to Drew Kibler and Austin Katz,
Yeah.
and I think
Good
Austin was the
characters.
I think that Austin was the one who said this year's team was by far the weirdest team that he had ever been a part of, and I loved that comment because we're in Austin and you're supposed to keep Austin weird, and
Right.
like I'm weird, and I like to think that Eddie's such a character, but Eddie doesn't quite strike me as weird, and I like to think that was in part from your influence.
Yeah, it probably was. I mean, like I got my ears pierced like in January.
Uh,
So it's part of, I have a bunch of tattoos, which has been something that's like maybe Eddie and Chris wouldn't always have agreed with in the past, but I mean, I think a good snapshot or a good story to illustrate it a little bit is like for a really long time, we've always, part of the Texas tradition is, whenever we go to travel meets, we always wear suits, right? Suit, a tie, clean shaven, nicely cut hair, nothing out of place. We want to look like complete gentlemen, look like we are coming from, business office. Obviously, we want to represent the university in a great light. And, anywhere we go, if people are asking us who we are, we always take time to talk to them about it and chat on planes and stuff. But one of the things over the last like 2 years, especially, Eddie and I kind of talked about was, maybe letting people have a little bit of their own flair with it, right? Like maybe not necessarily requiring people to have clean shaven faces anymore, right? Maybe allowing people to wear cowboy hats, with their suit, or bolo ties instead of a normal tie, or cowboy boots instead of loafers or whatever. And I think that, you started to see everyone was obviously still a team, right? I mean, everyone has the same general look, but people started taking some liberties with some flair or with some fashion statements, and it allows people to kind of forge their own identities a little bit. And I think that this past year, Katz was spot on, and Drew as well. Like Drew and I, we spent a lot of time talking just the past 2 years about the team, and I mean I have a lot of great things to say about Drew. I mean, he's like a world-class kid, and he has such a good head on his shoulders and such a high EQ, and he's really good at reading people. And so is Austin. I mean, he's such a leader of the team as well, and they both have imprinted themselves on this group of guys, which is incredible to see. I mean, that's one of the best things about being a college coach, or I would imagine like a professor or a teacher as well. But one of the things that we had talked about was how this year's team, like, people were really okay with having their own identity and having their own weirdness, right? And kind of like embracing that to a degree. And everyone loved how freeing it was, right? Everyone loved how weird everyone else was. And so it was this snowball effect of like, you had Ryan Hardy, who would be at practice like singing Queen songs, and like you would have Kibler for like almost, I think for like 30 or 60 days straight, he would do a belly flop into the pool at the beginning of practice. And you had all these other like guys who would be practical jokesters, and they'd come in and tell the team like really just dumb jokes that weren't even funny, but were at some point they were so bad they became funny, and it became like a tradition in and of itself. There's one point where the guys on the team started a cricket hunting competition. I'm not even kidding you, because I don't know. I don't know where you are in Austin, but on campus, like there's maybe a month out of every year where there's crickets everywhere. Like, have you noticed
Okay.
that?
I don't know if I have,
No?
but
Okay. So like all the facilities on campus, like there's crickets around, right? And the pool is no exception to that. Probably because it's, just like a perfect environment for that.
Mhm.
And so they like they started a cricket hunting competition, and they would keep tallies on the whiteboard in the locker room of how many crickets had been caught and how many had been eaten. And they, at the end of it, all pitched in and bought a little trophy, a cricket hunting trophy, and the winner of the competition got that trophy. It's just, it's weird stuff like that where, sometimes, and that's just a sliver of it, but Eddie and I would sit down during practice or before practice sometimes and look at each other and just be like, what the heck is going on? And then they would throw down like some of the craziest practices we've ever seen, and we're just like, all right, something's working.
Absolutely. um, well, Wyatt, thank you so much for your time and for your honesty.
Yeah, of
I,
course.
I certainly appreciated hearing it. Um, and hopefully I can see you on a pool deck sometime soon.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. It'd be good to have you back on deck, and once we hopefully get back in the TSC and things get back to normal, we'd love to have you come by practice and get some footage and see the guys sing, and maybe we can coincide it with cricket season this year.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. There we go.
Hey, do you love SwimSwam as much as I do? Do you want hours of endless practice footage, race video, and a guide to the best pancakeries in the country? Then subscribe to our YouTube channel below. And follow us on social media at SwimSwam News on Twitter and Instagram. If we get 1 million followers, I might just eat 1 million pancakes. Only one way to find out.